Well, I think Parliamentary Review does something very interesting. It provides a platform for people to share and express their views, and I hope we're going to be able to build on that even more so that people can interconnect with each other. But it also gives an opportunity for parliamentarians to know that people are taking interest in what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that cares about raising standards. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the first budget delivered over a podcast perhaps. Who needs Parliament anyway? The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We discuss everything from how the economy is being boosted by the effects of rising take-home pay, to which televisions on the market have the best liquid crystal display, and of course the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Blunkett, the former Home Secretary, former Education Secretary, and of course current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Dr. Ahmed Shibli, the Managing Director of European Technology Development. Based in Leatherhead, ETD provides a technical consulting to power and processing plants worldwide, and indeed receives 90% and plus of its business from overseas work. Working in a cutting-edge sector, ETD and Ahmed have developed their own equally cutting-edge technology, and I'm quite looking forward to learning more now. Ahmed, welcome.
Thank you.
It's been a number of months since ETD have been featured in the review. Perhaps I thought we should start with, and I'm sure the listeners would love to know what yourself and the team have been up to since.
Well, we have been actually involved in, I think for the last many years, we have been involved in research and development projects. So now although we are still continuing with the research and development projects, we have basically intentionally gone more into focusing more into application of these new tools and new procedures that we have developed in actually inspecting and assessing the condition of the power and processing plants in the various countries. So as a result, we have got 3 projects in Malaysia just now.
Fantastic. And I think we'll probably get onto that in a little bit more detail, actually, because the company has, and I think it's fair to say, a reputation for working with industry and engineering organisations, not just, of course, in Britain, but abroad as well, especially in Europe. Maybe this is a soft question, but is it possible to overstate the importance of working with universities and research institutes on that front?
No, well, actually, I mean, we have worked for many years with the European sort of industry and universities in Sweden, in Germany, in France, and Belgium, and in many other countries really, and in the UK, especially Imperial College. So our name, European Technology Development, comes from our really collaboration that we initially started through European Commission and with the European industry and European universities. And more recently, we have been focusing both more internationally, outside Europe as well, and also with the UK universities. So we have, as perhaps you have seen through our reviews in 2017 and 2018, that we have developed collaboration with the University of Manchester and with Portsmouth University. And the Imperial College, as I said before, we have already been working with them. And we are trying to develop collaboration now with Nottingham University as well.
And I know that the project you're working with University of Portsmouth on, I think it was, obviously when we last spoke in the process, the project developed it being patented in Europe. So it was tremendously exciting. And given that you do work with so many of these institutions in Britain and across Europe, what have you found to be the key takeaway points in being able to build up a business education relationship in that sense?
Well, I think one thing to perhaps to say or to emphasize is that having worked with European universities and then the UK universities, I think our standard is perhaps one of the best in the world in terms of research and development. I think the only perhaps our weakness is that unlike, for example, in Germany, the collaboration between the industry and the universities is not that clear cut. And I think because unlike Germany, the institutes like Fraunhofer Institute in Germany, institutes in Germany, they bring research and industry closer very well. And in the UK, we don't have a mechanism like that. So at the moment, EPSRC sort of gives funding to the universities to get involved with the industry, but I think there is less of a direct collaboration between the universities and industry.
And just for some of the listeners, the EPSRC, because the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council. And I think that's something certainly. And I promised myself I wasn't going to say the B word this early on, but maybe I'm going to have to. But because of Brexit, I think there will certainly have to be lessons to be learned to keep up some sort of competitive advantage on that front. Certainly to adopt what the Germans do, as you mentioned, and have more collaboration between the private sector and our universities and research institutes. Now, I know at ETD, you, of course, it can use. You have a scheme called Group Sponsored Projects, GSPs. And could you explain that for us in a little bit more detail?
I think, Jonathan, if it's possible, maybe if I go slightly into the European collaboration and then to this GSP.
Yes, please. That would be. I'd appreciate that. Would be perfect.
Yeah. So we have been actually sort of leading in terms of European collaboration, and I myself had initiated a number of. I think at that time, perhaps some years ago, some of the largest European industrial projects. We also I headed an organization called European Collaborative Committee, or ECCC, or EC3, as we call it.
Very catchy.
So I have been running that I ran that for about 15 years. And the idea of that was to bring all the European data and standards together in materials sciences and in engineering involved with the high temperatures of industrial plant. And harmonize the European codes and standards. And the reason for that is because a lot of now industries, they don't really necessarily recognize borders. And we don't know if Alstom, what used to be Alstom and now GE, if that is it was at one time, it was a French company, and then it became UK company, then it's partly USA, now GE is kind of USA, Germany. In fact, they have more operation now in the other day somebody was telling me that GE is now really a Chinese company rather than USA company because they have a lot of manufacturing in China and a lot of testing labs in China. So because of this kind of international collaboration and crossing over the borders, it didn't make any sense that British standards are different from German standards and French standards and so on. We had to harmonize those. So European CREEP Collaborative was involved in bringing all this data and the codes and standards and harmonizing them, bringing them together. Then the GSPs are the group-sponsored projects.
Yes.
Where we find a common problem in the context of sort of the power industry, and then we approach a number of industries if they would like to fund that project. So we, for example, some of our GSP projects have been funded by Eskom in South Africa, Sasol, which is a petrochemical industry, Eskom is the electricity industry in South Africa, Sasol, which is a petrochemical industry, TNB, Malaysian national power industry, GE from USA, Enel from Italy. So a number of companies have been coming, Siemens from Germany, they have been coming together and funding these projects, which involved quite a bit of research and development as well.
A fantastic way, and clearly an effective way, to bring all of these groups together. And I think it reiterates, it really proves your point that when it comes to this sort of research and development, borders really don't matter.
Absolutely. I think one of our other problems is really that no one country, we realized through this European collaboration that no one country has got all the expertise or even all type of testing equipment. So, for example, in one of our projects which involved very large pressure vessel testing, we could only find facilities for that type of testing, high temperature, high pressure testing facilities in Germany. So we collaborated with a German organization in Stuttgart called NPA, and others for testing, and other organizations from various countries, they funded that project. There is another aspect, another equipment that we developed, which we thought is really, I think, worth mentioning. That is what we call scanning force microscope, which is a portable version of atomic force microscope. Now, so far as we know, atomic force microscope has been used mainly for medical research. It was unknown in the industrial sector. So ETD actually, together with Surrey, with the University of Surrey in Guildford, worked on this particular project to develop the atomic force microscope into a portable version that we can use on industrial plant. And we successfully did that and demonstrated it some years ago on a petrochemical plant or a refining plant in Italy called Roma Refinery. And since then we have used it in many countries. We have used it in France on electricity de France plants. We have used it in Philippines. We have used it in Malaysia. We've used it in many countries to inspect the plant components.
I think it might be quicker to name the countries you haven't used it in, Ahmed. But in fact, on that, I think with that in mind, actually, especially when it comes to developing technology and putting it to use elsewhere. I think for a lot of people, when you talk about that these days, they think of perhaps specifically drone technology. Now, that's something even the layman like myself has become more aware of in all kinds of different sectors, whether it's defence or you buying groceries, they talk about. But yourself at ETD, I know that you've gone a step further in a way, and you're calling your idea, you were anyway, a flying robot. Let's hope it's a benign one, but what's the idea behind this, Ahmed?
Well, the idea behind that is that for industrial plant inspection, it is a quite labor-intensive job, especially the big power plant boilers, for example, which could be as high as many-story buildings. They are quite complex, and to inspect them, we have to spend days and weeks in building up the scaffolding for the usual if you like, planned shutdown and planned inspection every year or every few years.
Yes.
Then if there's some leakage or there's an accident, then we have to investigate where the leakage is. That means we have to build up scaffolding.
Very time consuming.
Very time consuming, and also not very safe always. And then when you build up scaffolding in one site where you think there's a leakage, we realize that actually leakage is not there. The steam was coming from somewhere else, or the water leakage was from somewhere else. So we have to move the scaffolding to another part of the boiler. So to cut the story short, drones can do inspection much more easily than the human beings. But unfortunately, the drones, although they can do the visual inspection and they can do thermal inspection for the heat leakage and so on, they can't necessarily, because they are not really, they have to keep on hovering, so they are not that stable. They cannot actually do the other type of what we call non-destructive examination, NDE. So for that we need robots. Now the problem is robots cannot climb everywhere in a power plant boiler, for example.
Of course.
And therefore, although they are very good in doing the cleaning up of the surfaces and doing the closer inspection with ultrasonic and so on to look for the cracks and defects, they cannot access or cannot get to various parts of the plants very easily. So now the idea is that we build a hybrid system which can fly to a particular place and can do the inspection, various types of inspections. And in fact, we have built a demo model which we are going to fly on Friday, the day after tomorrow.
Excellent.
And then it's just for demonstration that this is possibility and this is successful. And once we can show that, then we'll be looking for funding from the industry to develop a proper sort of proper prototype.
And I imagine what your link, especially with ETD's links with, especially with businesses in Japan and Korea, it's something they must be exceptionally interested in.
Absolutely, yeah. And in fact, I mentioned the power plant inspection, but once we build this hybrid system, it can be actually used anywhere for tall bridges, for tall buildings, for all kind of structures, So there are no limits to that. And in fact, drones can be used, if we forget about the military usages and defense use for a minute, for just the development, agricultural development, for exploring oil and gas reserves and deposits and various other types of things. In fact, the sky is the limit for what we can do in future in terms of peace and in terms of development.
Well, I wish you all the best of luck for the test on Friday. And if anyone's in the area and sees something that looks suspicious, don't be panicked, I suppose. Now, ETD has had a great deal of success over the years. I think it's fair to say, Ahmed, is probably an understatement, in fact. But looking at the company itself, you, especially when it comes to raising standards, have you developed a particular model that you think that has allowed for this to happen?
Sorry, when you say particular model, well, we have been developing. We have been contributing to the European codes and standards. I talked about the European Collaborative Committee. I was also in charge for about 3 years of another organization called European Pressure Equipment Research Council. So we have been basically contributing to data and information to European standards. We have also produced our own guidelines. And I think one of the most important things perhaps I can mention is that we have been kind of leading organization looking into the flexible operation of fossil power plants. With the introduction of the renewable energies, the fossil power plants, they have to be, a lot of time they have to be on the standby. And that means that if wind, which can literally disappear within minutes, and sun, which especially in this country, as you know, can disappear very quickly, the power plants have to be started up very, very fast. And that means that there could be a lot of damage to the power plant, expensive components, some of them costing millions of pounds. So we have prepared the guidelines of how to prepare the power plants for flexible operations so that damage is reduced and the damage to the components and the failure rate in the components is reduced. So you can do design modifications. You can do a lot of things. You can modify the operating sort of procedures and inspection and monitoring. We have developed new inspection techniques as well. In fact, that's another sort of through a group sponsored project. We have developed some new inspection techniques, and you can use those to reduce the damage. So we have helped in terms of renewable energies, use of renewable energies. Yeah.
As things stand, perhaps now looking a little more broadly as things stand, what do you think is the biggest challenge that the sector faces at the moment?
Power sector. I think power sector, although in Europe now, and rightly as well, the fossil power plants they are a declining sector, but they still have to be on the standby at least for the foreseeable future because of the issues with the wind and with the solar. So I think we are perhaps okay with the power sector. It depends on the nuclear could be used as a standby, and that will be perhaps preferred. But as you know, some of the European countries, especially after Fukushima, they are not very happy with the nuclear industry. So they have to keep perhaps some fossil power plants in the background, just as standby sort of plants. But unlike Europe, in many Asian countries, developing countries like China, India, Malaysia, so on, they are building new fossil power plants, and therefore we still have to develop technologies because our companies, they will be designing and building those plants, and they have to stay in business in that sense that if they are not into business, then in this business, then they will be losing a lot of business to the Japanese and perhaps
without a doubt. And so I'm conscious that we're coming near the end of our time actually, Ahmed, but it would be remiss if I didn't bring it up, and no one wants to talk about it, but we're going to have to. The current political situation obviously is a unique one I think we find ourselves in. What are your thoughts on it, especially perhaps, and to be maybe that's part of a broader question, when it comes to the issue of Brexit specifically, and the fact that no one really knows what is going to happen by the end of October. Have you found much frustration within the sectors you work with in that there hasn't been a definitive answer one way or the other?
Yes, there is actually, and I think we are losing a lot of, if you like, research and development incentive in this country, which we used to get by collaboration with the European organizations. So a lot of my colleagues from the universities and different industries, they are not sure if they should be going anymore for the European Commission funded proposals for European collaboration, because we don't know where we will be in the next few months, few weeks, or a few years. A lot of these projects could be 3 or 4 years duration. So there is a frustration in that. European collaboration has been actually a very successful sort of venture in research and development and in industrial collaboration. So that is unfortunate, but I think one of my point will be that we can understand why people voted for Brexit as well. So I think in future perhaps we have to keep in mind that it's not really research and development and elite jobs that the elite section of the society that we have to look after. We have to look after the society, which section of the society which basically was badly hit by this European Union's of initiative, like this European Union venture, and we have to look after them, and we have to make sure that they are not adversely affected. Otherwise, the results will be as we have now.
Quite, and I think, especially as ETD has proved, you don't. You have to be in a political union with the United States or Japan or Korea to be able to work with them on a collaborative basis for everyone's benefit. So,
we could do that. I mean, sorry, maybe if I can just make one point. I talked about scanning force microscope or atomic force microscope that we developed, portable version that we developed. Actually, that was developed with the help of a organization called NTMDT in Russia, in a city called Zelenograph. So yes, there is a possibility of collaboration with other countries as well, obviously, And in fact, there are only two organizations which could make that type of microscope. One was in Switzerland, one was in Russia. And the Russian organization, they were more flexible and they were prepared to invest money to develop it into something that could be used in industry, and the Swiss organization was less flexible, so we had to go to the Russian organization. So it just shows an example that we can do this collaboration with the non-EU countries as well. Yeah.
Without a doubt, and I think if we're to make the best of it and to make a success of it, I think that's certainly the attitude so many in business are taking. And perhaps just to finish, because again I'm conscious of the time, Ahmed, it's gone quite quickly. What would you say to young people, especially those that want to starting their own career, perhaps they're still at school? What advice would you give them for starting their careers out, especially if they were keen to work in the sector you do, Ahmed?
I think there's a lot of future in science and technology and in engineering, and in both research and development and in application and development of industry. But not only that, in the development of agriculture, in the development of medicine, healthcare, and so on. It's actually these are very exciting times. And I think they will be getting even more exciting with the new what we call IoT, Internet of Things, or Internet of Everything, and with the drones, with the robots. There's also the development of mini or micro robots, creepy crawling sort of robots, which can go to different places and they can do the repair work, for example, in industry. They can help the agriculture. So I think the future is very exciting in science and engineering for the new generation.
Excellent. Well, with that, and a very positive note, and a lot to be positive about, Ahmed, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you.
I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Ahmed, especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at ETD are continuing to raise standards. Do look out for a flying robot over your local power plant soon. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, David Blunkett. Lord Blunkett served as Home and Education Secretary in Tony Blair's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2015. Outside of politics, he's the Vice President of the Royal National Institute of Blind People and the National Alzheimer's Society, and when he has the time, he can be found cheering on his team, Sheffield Wednesday. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to David. Here it is now. We're now joined by Lord Blunkett. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Now, it would probably be remiss of me if I didn't start, given the recent events in Parliament. I didn't ask you, given your 32 years in that place, about your thoughts regarding the unprecedented situation I think the public are looking at the minute.
Well, I think I see it very much like Joe Public. I see it as though I'm looking at something that is made up, that is scripted, that is like almost a sci-fi film where anything can happen and then anything does happen. And I'm very sad about that because I think that it's damaged our parliamentary democracy. I think that it's brought politics into disrepute, and I think it's created anger on all sides, whether people were strongly in favour of remaining or whether they were, as we call them, Brexiteers.
Absolutely. And given that situation, whether it's going to be a general election, many people are beginning to worry about how apathy taking effect.
Well, I'm worried about two things. Apathy in the respect of turnout and whether people vote, and anger and, if you like, the friction developed into a failure to be able to have a democratic dialogue, so that the respect that we have for each other, that the way in which we debate issues is often now broken down, and there's abuse in the street, not just of people because they're considered to be different or foreign, but because people recognize they have a different point of view. Now, that is new. I've been around in formal politics now for, goodness, almost all my adult life, because I was elected to a local authority in my city of Sheffield when I was 22. And I've never seen that. I've seen people get very annoyed, and that's fine, and people should get angry, but I've never experienced them display it in such personal venom before. And we need to calm that, because our democracy depends on people being able to have genuine disagreements and differences and to work them through the political process. Otherwise, we fall, as history teaches us, into the hands of extremists.
Absolutely. And given that you've just said what you just said, a lot of people are talking now about whether the party structure, which does exist at the minute, it can survive. We've seen both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party showing signs of buckling.
I think the political system the party system will survive. It may have a very rocky time in the near future, but I think it'll right itself. But it will only do that if political parties themselves sort out what's going on internally. I think both major parties have been, to use an old phrase, infiltrated. Came across a prominent minister just outside the cabinet whose current chair of their Conservative Association was the UKIP candidate against him back in 2015. We know about the challenges within the Labour Party and the way in which people who were thrown out of the party have either been able to or are seeking to rejoin. And so we've got this two-ender, if you like, the bread in the two sides of the sandwich coming together, and the middle is being squeezed. Now, there's academic work to say that actually the electorate aren't all that keen on centre parties, particularly at the moment. And I think we need to be wary of believing that the creation of some sort of centrist party in Britain would solve the problem. It would temporarily, but it wouldn't resolve the differences that people have and how we work them through.
A lot of people have been suggesting recently that the only way out of this situation is with a second referendum. And I'm right in saying that you have quite reluctantly come to that position yourself.
It took me a very long time to come to the conclusion that we would need an affirmative vote. I resisted it because I come from and represented an area deeply disaffected, feeling the effects of deindustrialization and then the austerity measures on the back of the global meltdown, and felt in my bones, which is why I wasn't one of those who thought we were easily going to win the referendum for Remain in 2016, that you need to deal with the underlying problems and causes of that disaffection. And the simple slogan, "They didn't hear you the first time, tell them again," could be very effective, a kind of Trumpian slogan that could be adopted by those who are very, very vehement Brexiteers. However, I think given the state that we're in, I came to the conclusion a few weeks ago, and I wrote in the Daily Telegraph, that I think the only way to deal with this is to get an agreement for this interim period, because that's what it is, a transition from where we are to where we might be, and then put that to the British people. And if the British people don't like that negotiated agreement, either Theresa May's original or something that emerges from the discussions and the debate and the toing and froing between the two major parties, put that to the electorate and give them a chance 3 years on from 2016 to make a new choice as to whether that's what they want to go for, that's the direction they want to take, or whether they'd like to take a step back and remain in the European Union.
And do you think that the people of Sheffield that did vote leave, many of whom voting for the first time in decades or the first time ever, do you think that they would feel maybe slightly frustrated at the call for a second vote?
Yes, I think they would. And I think we just have to be really honest about that. There would be a great deal of frustration, bordering on anger, people saying, we gave you the message, why didn't you just do it? And we have to be straight with them. The reason it's been complex, the reason it's taken this time, the reason that we are in the undoubted mess we're in, is because it wasn't simple. You didn't, as some people thought, sign a bit of paper and walk away. This is a complex, interconnected, economically, socially, in terms of our trade and our relationships, not just within the European Union, but with the European Union's agreements across the world. This is a complex issue. And to pretend otherwise is not to give people what they want. It's to patronize them and say, yes, we don't think you were wrong. We don't think that you got it wrong when you thought it was a simple way out. I think you just have to be straight with them, and they'll be angry. I mean, people are angry with me when I walk around in my own constituency and say, what are you up to? And I say, I'm up to trying to speak the truth. I'm up to trying to say it as it is, as I always have done.
Absolutely. Now, given all of that, one would expect the governing party to perhaps be somewhere between 20 points and to 30 points behind the opinion polls, but they are not. There has been an awful lot of criticism of the leadership of the opposition regarding that. Would you have any advice for the leadership of your party?
Well, I think belatedly, from the beginning of April, the two parties realised that they were going to sink separately if they didn't actually try and make an effort and at least display some endeavour to work together. I think had there been two different leaders post-2016 referendum, this would have happened a great deal earlier. It hasn't, but it can now. And it is remarkable that in the circumstances that the government have found themselves, not just in not being able to get the kind of deal that some people wanted, but even being able to hold all their party together, but actually being totally riven publicly with cabinet responsibility having broken down, to find themselves only marginally behind, or even on opinion polls through March, marginally in front of the Labour Party, is astonishing. And once this period is over, I think Labour will need to take a very long, hard look at why the British people have not turned, as they often do, to what is called Her Majesty's opposition. There are very complex reasons for that, including the fact that the leadership of the party have only realised, I think, very, very recently, that you have to reach out to people whose views you don't agree with, and you have to win them over to something more than the issues and the policies and the ideology you thought of in the first place.
And on that point, you'll be aware, certainly, that the Parliamentary Review itself has been dedicated to showcasing leadership in all its forms across the country. Now, speaking to many of our contributors, they have made clear that they do feel that leadership has been lacking, both from the government and opposition, as you've said. In your many years in politics, is there a time in certainly recent history where there has been perhaps a leadership vacuum like we're seeing today?
I think we find in Britain an interesting paradox. People want strong leaders, but they want leaders that listen and are responsive. And the two don't always go together. I've lived through the period of both Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair, two leaders who knew what they wanted to do and were prepared to put it on the line. I've lived through Ted Heath and John Major, who were less clear Ted Heath on Europe, yes, but not on much else. John Major really trying to mop up after the controversial and divisive Thatcher era, where they showed a different style of leadership. Now, they were portrayed as being weak. I don't think that's always the case. I think that you can have leaders who are very clear what they want to do, but to turn on its head the Marxist slogan, speak softly and walk with a big stick, they can actually do the job clearly and decisively. Clem Attlee was such a person, and in many ways so is Harold Macmillan. And those are the kind of leaders where you don't get bombast, you don't get, I know best and I'm going to push this through, but you actually get someone who can genuinely create a coalition of the willing, but has a clear idea about their values. And I hope we'll return to that.
Absolutely. And I think one of the strengths of the review has always been its sense of bipartisanship. Well,
I think Parliamentary Review does something very interesting. It provides a platform for people to share and express their views, and I hope we're going to be able to build on that even more so that people can interconnect with each other. But it also gives an opportunity for parliamentarians to know that people are taking interest in what they're doing and how they're doing it, and therefore to get the message that they've got to reflect outwards. We need both. We need the input into the system. We need voices. We need ideas. We need experiences through Parliamentary Review inwards, but we also need to ensure that the way in which our politics works is reflected outwards, so that people firstly understand how the system works, secondly, the complexity and difficulty of it, and thirdly, the way in which they need to tell us, I mean, I'm in the upper house now, but to tell us as parliamentarians what they think and where we're going wrong, and for us to listen.
Absolutely. And on that point, you've been in public service for most of your life, Lord Blunkett, ever since Sheffield City Council. I mean, in that time, what are the key lessons you think you've learned in the best way for policymakers and those at the coalface to communicate and work together?
I've learned that actually there is enormous wisdom out there, and if you're prepared to engage and to listen, then your views might actually change. Mine have on a number of issues, particularly social issues, what small L liberal issues over the years, going in the opposite direction, it has to be said, to most people as they age. And you need to ensure that you've reached out to sufficient people to create that coalition that allows you to make progress, and that you won't create everything you want and change everything you want for the better overnight. It will never happen. There's no days where everything's done and we can all wash our hands of it and that's fine. We build building blocks. We stand, if you like, historically on the shoulders of those who came before us. And if we get that message, we won't be too frustrated when everything doesn't happen immediately, but we'll be determined to make progress, and we'll punish politically, democratically, those who don't.
Absolutely. And perhaps finally, with that concluding point, it's fair to say, as you've already mentioned, a lot of the population are frustrated, no matter how they vote in the referendum or their general political opinions. But perhaps, for those people, is there something you'd point to be optimistic, looking towards the future about?
I think I'm very clear. We're a great nation. We can't just do things on our own. We have to recognise that we live in an incredibly rapidly growing global environment, and the power sources and the power politically has changed over the last 20, 30 years. But we are creative, we are innovative, and we will pull through, and we'll do it because we won't have anyone else to blame anymore if we come out of the European Union, and we'll need to literally pull our socks up and do it ourselves. In the end, my message is clear. Nothing is ever as good as it seems at the time, and nothing is ever as bad. And we've come through difficult times in the past, and we'll come through again.
Lord Blunkett, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off to St Stephen's Tavern to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you very much for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by guests in each podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guests on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit our website at www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.